Please welcome to the stage Biz Sanford and Steve Lunsbury.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Hope you're excited for the first talk after lunch and not too sleepy. My name is Biz, and this is Steve. I lead content strategy on across our orders and fulfillments teams, and Steve leads engineering. And we're here to talk to you today about our new fulfillment APIs and building a stronger foundation for the future. So this talk is for you if you use the Fulfillment API, Fulfillment Services API, Inventory API, or the Orders API. And don't worry about taking too many notes as we're going through. We'll have all this documentation available for you on developers.shopify.com. So you're also about to hear the word fulfillment about 100 times, so buckle up. Case in point, fulfillment. Before we get into the API details, I want to talk to you about why this is so important for our merchants. So last year, we launched locations, and this brought major improvements for merchants who manage orders and fulfill inventory across multiple locations. This year, we're continuing to build for these merchants by updating the fulfillment APIs to better support types of locations and complex fulfillment workflows. So Shopify was originally built for merchants who had one location and fulfilled orders from that location. Looking back, we were a simpler product, which represented the needs of our merchants at the time, but the merchants on our platform have evolved. From having inventory in their basement and shipping out all of their own orders to having warehouses across the world and staff members who pick and pack and fulfill their orders. We need to be able to grow with our merchants because we now support so many different types of merchants. They have multiple locations, like retail stores and warehouses. They use third-party fulfillment services and dropshipping providers. And all of these locations fulfill orders in different ways. So merchants need to be able to send fulfillment requests to fulfillment services. They need to be able to cancel those requests if the customer changes their mind. They also need to prepare and ship out all of their own orders from the locations that they manage themselves. When a customer calls in asking about where their order is, merchants need to be able to quickly answer this question. Is the shipment being packed by their fulfillment service right now? Is it already out in the mail stream? Merchants need visibility into the entire fulfillment process across all of their locations. Helping merchants manage and fulfill their orders is fundamental to the success of their businesses. So on a typical day, our merchants process millions and millions of fulfillments. And Mondays are the biggest day of all for fulfillments after the weekend. And our biggest Monday ever was Cyber Monday last year, where there was nearly twice the normal fulfillment volume, so like extra millions on all of the normal millions. And the most exciting part is that year over year, the number of fulfillments our merchants do is increasing by hundreds of millions. This is why the opportunity to help merchants in this space is so great. We've been working hard to create a new foundation for fulfillment that allows us to build all of the functionality that merchants need. It's the underlying framework that will unlock a world of possibility. We're super excited to share it with you today and explain how it impacts the future of order fulfillment for us all. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve now, who's going to talk about our new fulfillment APIs.
Thanks, Biz. Okay, so today we're introducing a brand new model fundamental to fulfillment at Shopify, the fulfillment order. If you're familiar with the logistics industry, you may have heard of this term before. To Shopify, a fulfillment order represents what needs to be fulfilled from what location for a given order. A fulfillment order tracks the life cycle of fulfillment work at a high level. In the happy path, it begins life as open, transitions to in progress as fulfillment work begins, and finally moves to closed as all work is completed. However, sometimes fulfillment work doesn't follow a happy path, and so we do have states that represent canceled and incomplete fulfillment orders. The introduction of the fulfillment order concept helps solidify a number of things. It tracks and provides clear ownership of remaining fulfillment work. So a fulfillment order can be assigned to a merchant location or a fulfillment service location. And it provides a mechanism to transfer that work between those locations. It formalizes the fulfillment request process. And so apps can now either accept or deny fulfillment requests, and merchants can send a cancellation request for an already accepted fulfillment request. It does help to see an example, so let's check that out. Here's what a merchant sees for a normal multi-location order on their order details page in Shopify. They can see what's been ordered, where the locations are that Shopify decided these items should be fulfilled from. And for this order, since there are 2 locations involved, you can see that there are 2 open, behind the scenes, we have 2 open fulfillment orders. One at the merchant location, 150 Elgin, and another one at a fulfillment service location called Droop. Now, while the merchant has been able to see this information since the launch of locations last year, we didn't actually expose this information on the API for you as developers to consume. And this was one of the biggest pieces of feedback we received after the launch of our locations feature. We saw your tweets, we saw your forum posts, we had one-on-one conversations with you as partners, and so we heard you. And now on the right, you can actually see how Droop's items to fulfill are represented behind the scenes in the fulfillment order model and available on the API. Each fulfillment order contains details about what needs to be fulfilled, the quantities to be fulfilled, and their assigned location. You can also use Shopify's GraphQL API to get whatever information is relevant for your app. So that assigned location is a pretty powerful concept, and it's worth looking at a little closer. In this case, it defines which merchant location or fulfillment service location is assigned to do the work. In this case, the fulfillment order is assigned to a fulfillment service location called Droop. And what this means is that Droop is the only app that can fulfill this work unless the merchant decides to move the fulfillment order to another location. This aspect of fulfillment orders means apps no longer need to worry about accidentally fulfilling items meant for another app, and they no longer need to worry about trying to guess the fulfillment location using the inventory levels APIs. So when a merchant leverages a fulfillment service to perform fulfillment, there's a certain amount of communication that's required between the 2 parties. We call this a fulfillment request. This first release of fulfillment orders provides a process to make this easier between both the merchant and the app, and it just leaves it as a more transparent process. So let's have a look to see what that looks like. The fulfillment request has a life cycle of 3 main stages. First of all, a merchant is going to request fulfillment of the app. At that point, the app receives that fulfillment request and can either accept or reject the request. And then the app can perform fulfillment after that, after they've accepted the request. So let's have a look to see what happens when a merchant requests fulfillment. So our fictional dropshipping app, Droop, has registered to be a fulfillment service. This means Shopify has actually created a location behind the scenes that represents Droop, and this is where a merchant can stock their items. Droop has a fulfillment order assigned to their location for 2 items to be fulfilled, the Studio Bag and the Stratus Backpack. So the merchant hasn't actually requested fulfillment yet, and so on their order details page, they see the items as unfulfilled on a card that says Droop. The fulfillment order remains in an open state and request status of unsubmitted because it hasn't been submitted to the fulfillment service yet. When a merchant requests fulfillment, Shopify is now going to send a request directly to Droop and no other app. After sending the request, the merchant will see a requested status on the items, and the ball is now in Droop's court, waiting for them to fulfill, or waiting for them to accept or reject this request. Part of the improved fulfillment request flow is notes. Merchants and apps now have the ability to send notes back and forth during the whole fulfillment request process. And this improves communication between these two parties and improves visibility throughout the whole process. So in this case, you can see that the merchants asked the fulfillment service to please gift wrap the items. There's an important detail about how fulfillment requests are sent that I want to take a bit of a closer look at. Namely, that they're only there to indicate that there is something for your app to do. What this means is that Shopify is not going to send you all of the details of the fulfillment request, and it's up to your app to query us to ask us for those details. We have a specific endpoint that's designed just to give you the items that are relevant to your app, and we call that assigned fulfillment orders. And you can use our GraphQL APIs to pull whatever details you need. Now, most of you in this room are familiar with the fact that Shopify sees some pretty large flash sales over time for our large merchants. And so I want to take a look and see how our new fulfillment APIs make that a little bit better for your apps. So for example, let's say a merchant is having a big flash sale. They have autofulfill turned on, and they have a fulfillment service installed on their store. We want to avoid spamming your app with thousands and thousands of requests as orders come in. And so in practice, what this means is that the requests that we send your app will not be one-to-one with the actual requests that you have received. In high-load scenarios like this, Shopify is only going to send you a request every 30 seconds or so in order to insulate you from this high scale. So now that you've actually received a fulfillment request, let's see how you can either accept or reject that request. Okay, so back to the example. Droop has received a fulfillment request, and they can now ask for their list of assigned fulfillment orders using that assigned fulfillment orders GraphQL query that I mentioned before. At this point, they can pull down whatever relevant information they need in order to decide whether or not they need to accept or reject that request. Once they've made a decision, we have both accept and reject mutations available so that they can inform the merchant of their decision to undertake the work. So here, Droop provides a note for context for the merchant, saying that they're waiting on an inventory shipment and that they'll start work on Monday. After accepting the request, the fulfillment order will transition to an accepted state, and the merchant can see that Droop has actually accepted the work. So after accepting a fulfillment request, the app is now free to perform fulfillment as they need to. Since fulfillment orders actually separate the work to do from the work completed, as many fulfillments can be created as are needed in order to perform the work, with individual tracking numbers for each fulfillment. This is going to provide flexibility for the app in how to actually perform the fulfillment request. So here, Droop creates one fulfillment for one of the items on the fulfillment order, the Stratus backpack, leaving the studio bag unfulfilled. To create fulfillments with the new APIs, we've introduced a brand new call specific to fulfillment orders. In the old version of the API, you needed to inspect the inventory levels APIs to determine the location ID that you needed to provide along with the fulfillment. In this case, since the fulfillment order is now directly tied to the location where the fulfillment is supposed to occur, you no longer need to do that. This is going to save your app complexity and reduce the amount of API calls that you need to make. Also, if needed, fulfillments can span multiple fulfillment orders at the same location for the same order. So far, we've seen the happy path of fulfillment. As Biz likes to say, sometimes there's a bit of a sad path involved. So let's see what happens when that happens. So Droop has accepted the fulfillment request and they performed some work already. But in the meantime, the merchant receives a phone call from their buyer asking to switch out the studio bag for a backpack. Now, at this point, the merchant is in a bit of a situation because they need to change something that they've already requested of a fulfillment service. So if possible, they need to tell the fulfillment service to stop fulfillment so they can avoid mistakenly shipping the studio bag to their customer. With the previous version of the fulfillment APIs, once the merchant had sent a fulfillment request, they were kind of out of luck. They had no way to ask the fulfillment service to stop fulfillment. With the new APIs, we have a formalized cancellation request process. And so clicking on Cancel Fulfillment Request, Shopify is now going to send a request to Droop asking them to cancel their already accepted fulfillment request. So similar to a fulfillment request, the app must now examine that request and determine whether or not they can either accept or reject the cancellation request. At this point, it turns out Droop hasn't actually started fulfilling the studio bag yet, so it's no problem for them to accept the cancellation request. So now that the request is actually canceled, the fulfillment order will no longer be returned in Droop's assigned fulfillment orders query. The merchant sees that Droop has actually accepted the cancellation request, and the merchant is now free to edit the order for their customer. Okay, that was a lot to go through. And there's a couple things that we'd like apps to do in order to participate in this improved fulfillment request flow. First of all, we want you to add a fulfillment order notification endpoint to your callback URL. And this is where Shopify is going to send any fulfillment requests or cancellation requests that you receive. Your app can then query assigned fulfillment orders to pull down the details of these requests using whatever information you need in order to determine whether or not you can accept or reject that request. And for your accepted requests, you can fulfill at will. Having this more formalized fulfillment request process brings a lot of benefits. First of all, your app no longer needs to worry about drinking from the webhook fire hose of Shopify. Since a request is sent directly to your app and only when we have something for you to do, you no longer need to listen for any and all fulfillment create webhooks and try to filter those out to determine if this request is for you. Instead, you just use the new APIs and we'll just tell you exactly what it is that's been requested of you. Since the request process also allows notes, a merchant can send specific instructions along with their fulfillment request, and apps can provide context as to whether or not they can accept or reject a request. Now very clear what's happening throughout this whole process. I'm now going to throw it back to Biz, who will talk about a little feature that we launched yesterday.
So as you might have heard during Lindsay's main stage talk yesterday, we launched the ability for merchants to edit their orders, which is probably the most requested feature ever. The order editing GraphQL APIs are available in developer preview today for you to check out, and our new fulfillment APIs have been built with editing orders in mind. Right, so looking back to our example, the merchant needed to edit the order for their customer, which is why they canceled the fulfillment request. The merchant can now switch the studio bag for the backpack. When orders are edited, Shopify makes the required changes to fulfillment orders. When the merchant removes the studio bag, we close the fulfillment order. And when they add the backpack, we open a new fulfillment order. So after the merchant finishes editing the order, we're left with a completely new open fulfillment order. The merchant's now free to request fulfillment from Droop, but since they switched the item, they might have different fulfillment plans in mind. Cool. So let's take a little step back and talk about locations, inventory, and of course, fulfillment orders. So currently, merchants can only manage their inventory at either their own location or a fulfillment service location. But in reality, merchants might stock products at any of these locations. So next year, merchants will be able to stock products at all types of locations. This is one of the reasons why our new APIs are so important. This is a huge opportunity for you to help merchants manage and track their inventory. Okay, so remember how our merchant edited the order because their customer wanted the backpack instead of the studio bag? So previously, merchants could have only stocked this at either their own location or a fulfillment service location. In the future, they'll be able to stock it at both places. So the merchant decides that they actually want to fulfill this order themselves because the customer is located near one of their retail locations. They can click on the arrow beside Droop and change the location where the fulfillment's being fulfilled. We're opening up this change location feature to fulfillment services for the first time. The merchant can now select 150 Elgin, the location they want to fulfill it from, and click Save. So now that the merchant has changed the fulfillment location, the actions on the card have also changed, and they're free to fulfill this order themselves. The fulfillment service Droop no longer has the ability to fulfill the order. We're also opening up APIs for moving fulfillment orders. So order management apps will have the ability to move a fulfillment order to a different location after it's been created. This will offer a lot of flexibility for different situations and types of merchants. So an international merchant will be able to use different fulfillment warehouses in Europe and North America for the same product. Another example is a merchant who's growing and decides to test out a fulfillment service for the first time. They transfer some of their popular SKUs to the fulfillment service, but they continue to fulfill the majority of their orders themselves. If the trial with the fulfillment service goes well, they might transfer all of their inventory over to the fulfillment service. This entire process can happen with the exact same product catalog setup, no variant duplication, and no publishing tricks. Or how about a dropshipping merchant who's received a return for one of their dropshipped items? If the product's in good condition, the next order that has this item in it, they could actually fulfill it themselves instead of requesting fulfillment from the dropshipper. So these are just a couple examples of what the new APIs unlock. Let's talk about what this means for you all.
All right, so with this wonderful new foundation in place, we have great opportunities ahead of us, and we're super excited to see what you guys can build with this. So along with this does come some change. And as part of the release of these new APIs, we're asking you to update how your apps work with Shopify to perform fulfillment and manage orders. First of all, we obviously want you to start using the new APIs. The new fulfillment APIs will eventually replace the existing APIs. And so for example, if you're building a new app today, we'd like you to use the new APIs instead of the existing ones. Along with the release of these new APIs, we're also introducing more granular permission structure so that you can better inform a merchant how your app will interact with their stores to perform fulfillment. We also have both GraphQL and REST available, so don't worry, you don't have to worry about changing your app entirely in order to work with these new APIs. And if you're a fulfillment service, there are a few other changes you should keep in mind. Today, apps use the fulfillment service handle on an order line item to determine if they should fulfill the items. But with the release of multi-managed inventory, as Biz mentioned, line items may now actually be fulfilled by more than one fulfillment service or more than one merchant location. And so, as a result, you should use the new fulfillment APIs to determine if there's actually work for you to do and not rely on the fulfillment service handle on the line item anymore. Finally, to stock your items with a fulfillment service, we ask that you use the inventory levels APIs instead of setting the fulfillment service handle directly on the variant as you do today. We're super excited for you guys to try this out. I've been building this for like the last year with my teams. It's pretty cool. And we want to hear like all the feedback that you guys have. Our first stable release of these new APIs is coming in October. We have a developer preview available for you today for the new APIs. There's one coming in the next couple months for multi-managed inventory. And as Biz said, make sure to check out the order editing feature as well in the developer preview. As always, we have documentation available on developers.shopify.com.
Okay, so before we get into some questions that you might have, we want to just do a quick recap because we've covered quite a lot in this session. So we've built a new foundation for fulfillment. This means new fulfillment APIs and the concept of fulfillment orders. We covered the fulfillment request and cancellation request workflows and how APIs work when merchants edit orders. And we definitely also said the word fulfillment about 100 times, so.
Counted 98.
And lastly, we talked about how inventory will be able to be managed at both merchant locations and fulfillment service locations in the future. So with hundreds of millions of fulfillments a year and millions of fulfillments a day, the opportunity to help merchants in this space has never been greater. We're really, really excited to be able to build this future with you. Thank you. All right.
Time to take questions.
So questions. Okay. Craig asks, I carry items in my physical store that my supplier will also dropship for me. Is there any way for me to fulfill from my store locally and dropship otherwise?
That's the multi-managed inventory feature that we're talking about.
Yes.
So definitely, and as we mentioned, that'll be available sometime next year at this point. So
Yeah, so currently you can only, on Shopify's side, stock that at one location, and in the future, when this feature is available next year, you'll be able to track your inventory at both of those locations, so you can control which, when your fulfillments come in, you can change the location depending on which location's actually going to fulfill the item.
yeah, and that's a limitation of the current fulfillment service.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, Amos asks, is this new process only relevant to fulfillments initiated by merchants manually?
No. So this will be available for auto fulfillment as well. We're aware that the current auto fulfill settings on shops isn't ideal, and we have some plans to potentially improve that in the future. So stay tuned for that.
Jesse asks, hi Steve.
Hello.
Could you please?
Hey, where's Jesse?
Hi Jesse.
Oh, hey.
Could you please clarify the 30-second delay for fulfillment requests? Does that mean one request every 30 seconds?
So yeah, so basically, if there's a huge flash sale going on, we don't want to send you like thousands and thousands of requests that basically just say the same thing, which is, hey, there's a new fulfillment request for you. So the timing, like right now, our thought is timing is about every 30 seconds. If we receive feedback that that's not often enough or way too often, then we can look at that. But and the reason for that is just to avoid just sending you way too much stuff that isn't necessarily needed. So
yeah, so send us your feedback if you have thoughts.
yeah.
Okay. Zan asks, what is the optimal path to collect variant locations for order fulfillment for large orders? Variant locations for order fulfillment for large orders.
Is the question like how to actually know where the item should be fulfilled from on a given order, or large orders specifically? You know. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. So what you would want to do in that case, so the question is if there's a large order with say 60 items on it and you want to know the locations to fulfill each individual item on that order, like how would you do that without necessarily blowing up the GraphQL query budget? Yeah, so so essentially what you'd want to do in that case, unless there was like a ton of different locations included, you would probably only end up with like one or two fulfillment orders on that order itself. And so you can pull down the fulfillment order details, which will give you fulfillment order line items that have all the variants that need to be fulfilled along with their quantities. And so in this case, let's say there was two locations involved. You'd have two open fulfillment orders at each one at each location. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Or? It's on the fulfillment order next to the items on the fulfillment order. It's not right now. Yeah, this is what we're doing to solve that pain point, right? But come find me afterward, and if you have more questions.
Yeah, I think we're running out a little bit of time here, so we're gonna wrap it up here. But we have office hours after this until 4:30. If you want to come chat with us after, we have a half an hour or two to chat right now. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.